Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to another episode of the Ummah Times, where we help decolonize minds. And this is part two of an exciting discussion series that we are having on the topic of Khilafah, history and future. And we are happy to welcome back Sh.Omar Baloch and Brother Mazin to continue this dialogue on this very important topic. Assalamu alaikum, brothers, and welcome back.
Assalamu alaikum.
And for the viewers who would like to get to know our esteemed guest, we kind of like you to refer to part one of this discussion series, and the link for it you'll find on this video page. Now, I know in the first part of this discussion, we had a robust and very engaging discussion concerning the history of Khilafah. And in this part of the discussion, we're going to talk about Khilafah in the context of the present and future. And the question I'd like to discuss with you, very learned brothers, is that what are the steps to take to revive the Ummah, to live the Haqq in the most comprehensive manner? And just to provide context to stress the urgency of this, is the most horrendous oppression and injustices taking place against our brothers and sisters. It is safe to say that the happening of genocide against Muslims in modern history is unprecedented, but it looks like the secularization of the world has really taken the Muslims by storm and has made Muslims at all levels of society ineffective. And I'm going to bluntly say this has made us spineless. So what are the steps we ought to take to pave the way for the fruition of the Islamic system on this planet? And any of your brothers can jump in and kind of share your thoughts on this. Brother Mazin, you can start. Yeah.
I was going to Brother Ammar go ahead, but I think the primary cause for the Ummah's current situation is the secularization of the Ummah, whether them being aware of this or not being aware of it. And so the solution to this, one of the primary solutions to this, is to address this core problem. The problem with the Muslims today is that when I say secularization, is this concept that the political affairs of the Ummah, or so rather the political issues of this world, are addressed with a different mindset, a different approach than the ibadat and the akhlaq and the education and these sorts of things. So when it comes to our dress and our food and our marriage and salah and Eid and the masajid and putting our kids in school, we look at it from a correct Islamic perspective. We look at it from a quote unquote religious perspective. But whenever we go in the direction of politics, we tend to go in the direction of a cost-benefit analysis, looking at whatever is practical, looking at whatever is pragmatic. And so whenever you discuss anything related to politics, people talk about what makes sense and what is feasible and so on. And so until the Ummah understands that you need to approach political problems the same as you would approach a problem when it comes to marriage, like a marriage contract. You want to know, is this marriage contract permissible? Can I take this particular step when it comes to marriage, to forming a marriage contract? Can I do this in salah? Can I, during Ramadan and I have to break my fast for this reason, or let's say, can I miss Jum'ah because I have to work? The exact same approach that we would use for these issues, which is to go to the Quran and Sunnah and exclusively take the hukum as is. We don't use this, this idea of, well, what's the benefit of missing Jum'ah and what's the harm of missing Jum'ah? And then we kind of go with that sort of a analysis. Rather, what we have to do is we need to look at it as, what does the Quran and Sunnah dictate to us? And that's what we do. And so what happens is when it comes to the issues of politics, we talk about what is for example, like when we talk about the solution for Palestine, the solution for Kashmir, whenever we always go towards things that Islam never actually legislated. There's no legislation that says the solution for an invasion is to collect charity. The solution for an invasion...
Or appeal to the UN, I guess.
Exactly, to go to the kuffar and say, hey, save us and help us. Go to your MP and say, please, I beg you for some mercy. Please go and represent me. I'm not going to represent myself. And not only that, you have so many people speaking out against the call for the political system of Islam. And that's the thing, is that and really, I would say the very first step, which seems like it's the very last step, but it's the very first step, which is understanding that the Khilafah is the solution for the political problems. The Khilafah is a solution for every single element of our decline in modern day. everything else is a branch from that. So it's not that there's nothing else that's important. There's an issue of Iman, there's an issue of memorizing Quran and Sunnah, but all these things are branches from the core. Once you fix the core, you fix all the branches. And just one of the best examples of that is when you look at the Muslims of Medina, how much could they have learned in 1 year? How much of Islam did they even know in 1 year? And Islam hadn't even been fully revealed. The Prophet ﷺ had no authority, no strength, no capability. He was at the mercy of the worst people of his society, and he had no legislative authority over anyone. He had no military. He couldn't protect his own followers except through the mercy of some of the Sahaba who had a lot of money. And so the only way that he went from the situation of that he was, which is weakness and being unable to have any sort of independence, was when he established his own state, when he reached Medina. And so we have to understand that that we today will never get out of this situation until we understand that our solution includes the Khilafah. You can't say we have to work on these things and then we'll have a Khilafah. As soon as you do that, you've automatically contributed to the failure of this Ummah. It has to be all at the same time. We have to work on all the major components, such as, of course, the Aqidah and matters of Ibadah and obeying Allah Azza wa Jal and Akhlaq and so on, and the Khilafah. It's one and the same. And as soon as you separate them, you've secularized your approach. And that's something that we must be very, very careful not to do.
Sheikh Omar Baloch, you can weigh on in that.
Bismillah. The Islam is a deen, not a mazhab. And you see, modernity has given religion a particular role. And the role of religion in modernity is of a sanitation department. I think I've mentioned this before. And if you go to prisons, you need God. So you have chaplains there. And if you're sick, you need God. You have chaplains in the hospitals. But you don't need God in the White House or in the Congress or in Wall Street. And the role of religion is basically to alleviate suffering. So people are suffering, they need God. If there's, in the US, when there's a big shooting in a high school, then they bring on the priests and the pastors to talk about tragedy and why God did this. And so this is the role of religion in modernity. The role of religion is basically to alleviate the sufferings of man. So if I help someone who has HIV, or I build a charitable hospital that helps people with HIV, that's okay, by the role assigned by modernity for religion. But if I stand up and say this lifestyle is wrong that leads to you to go to this hospital, that is the problem. That is not the role of religion in modernity. If I am Mother Teresa and I help millions of people in their poverty and I put a bandage on the problem, that is okay. But to stand up and to say that the system is unjust, that is against the role assigned to religion in modernity. If I open up a kitchen soup and help people, they will make you a chaplain, they will give you a salary, they will give, you're helping alleviate pain, so you get a salary. But the minute the kitchen soup people also start criticizing that system, now you've gone beyond the role assigned to religion in modernity. And so the reason I mention this is that of course, starting from the Makki phase, which was an ideological phase in a sense, for what reason you killed this child girl, or destruction on the people that are do injustice in their business. And we're talking about a city that is the size of a school campus, a university. Everyone knows everyone. And when you are even hinting at something, everyone knows who it's being talked about. If I'd say, oh, people who steal in business, well, the society is so big, no one knows who I'm talking about necessarily. But when the Quran was coming down, this was not the case. Everyone knew everyone. أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدْعُو الْيَتِيمَ. Have you seen the one who denies the hereafter? He's the one who pushes away the orphan. It's very clear in that society who is pushing the orphan. تَبَّتْ يَدَا أَبِي لَهَبٍ وَتَبَّ. Quran is pointing fingers to a particular person. My point here is that we have accepted the role of religion today to be defined by modernity itself. Meaning modernity is for the Muslims. They have no problem. You buy a church and make it into a masjid. That's not the problem. Because secularism, by definition, says all religions, religious or not, all religions are equal. This is what secularism, the idea of secularism is, that everything is equal. So if you want to buy the church, or Jews want to buy a church, or some Hindus want to buy a church, and make it into whatever they want to make it, no problem. So now, Khilafah is a solution. And Khilafah is also, not having the Khilafah is also the problem, but I think the bigger problem is in terms of because there is a process, right? So there's a process. The biggest problem is lack of true Iman. And the biggest problem is that we actually don't believe in Islam as Islam wants us to believe in it. And so when we say Iman, we're talking about an ideology, the idea of Islam as a truth, as a reality, and so the biggest thing as far as Iman is concerned, because there's three ways to get Iman. Be with the righteous, whether it is Tabligh Jama'ah or some group of Tasawwuf, some Sufi group, some Dhikr group, whatever, you be with the righteous. Or you do good deeds, you keep following the Sunnah of the Prophet, keep following the Sunnah. This will give you Iman. But it won't give you an intellectual dimension of Iman. The intellectual dimension of Iman, which, the Quran, you can say, قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي. The Prophet was told to say something like, this is my way. قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي أَدْعُو إِلَى اللَّهِ عَلَى بَصِيرَةٍ. I call to Allah with full insight. أَنَا وَمَنِ اتَّبَعَنِي. Me and those who follow me. Our eyes are open. We know what we believe in completely. So it wasn't a process of culture that people believed I'm Muslim because I was born Muslim. It was a conscious decision to be Muslim, to have Iman, to have real Iman. And then this Iman, took such, you can say, became so rooted that it became reality. It became a conviction that they were willing to, that when you have a conviction of something, you become invested in it. Your time, your money, your energy, your life becomes invested in. But this intellectual Iman can only come by reconnecting with the Quran. And so the Prophet has two roles given in Quran over and over again. One is the one that the brother mentioned, which is repeated 3 times, and Sha'ulillah Muhaddis Dilbi Rahmatullah alayh, which is interesting because the first person to translate Quran from Arabic to Farsi, like the first major person to translate Quran. So all Quran, like he was the man of Quran. So Sha'ulillah says that without understanding this ayah, you cannot understand Quran. And that is هُوَ الَّذِي أَرْسَلَ رَسُولَهُ بِالْهُدَى وَدِينِ الْحَقِّ لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ. Muhammad came, he was sent for this exclusive purpose of establishing the justice of Islam, period. But more than justice, the ihsan of Islam, the mercy of Islam, the beauty of Islam. And then, in Surah Al-Hadid, Allah says it, وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلَنَا بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ وَأَنزَلْنَا مَعَهُمُ الْكِتَابَ لِيَقُومُ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ. Why did we send the messengers? Why did we send the book? It's for putting people upon justice. لِيَقُومُ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ وَأَنزَلْنَا الْحَدِيدَ. And we sent down the iron also. فِي بَأْسٌ شَدِيدٌ, and it is great strength. So this is very clear. But now, okay, this is the goal. Every time you start organization, you start some institute, you start something new, you have to have a goal. The goal is, thy will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. That just as Allah is obeyed in the heavens, you should be obeyed on earth. But what is the process now? The basic process given to the Prophet, we mentioned in 4 verses of the Quran. هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة. That a messenger from God comes and he recites to them his ayat, his verses, and he purifies them, because without purification there's no unity. You know, if you're not patient, you can't be with an Amir, you can't be with the Jama'ah. If you're not patient, then there's going to be 100 problems. Even if you all agree on something, there'll be 100 problems. This is one of the major problems that Ikhwan has had. This is one of the major problems that Jamaat Islami has had. Other Islamic organizations, their basic problem is that Tazkiyatun Nafs is not there from the Quranic perspective. So purifying the hearts. Why is he the Amir? Why was he given preference? I don't agree with him, etc., etc. This problem of the egos, of when the egos come together, this is the first thing Shaitan will do. And this is why the Prophet said, you know, in the hadith that where the Prophet says, Jihad is Zarwatul Salam, the highest peak of Islam. The Prophet said the thing that keeps it all together is the tongue. Because when you're in the Jama'ah, it's the tongue that will, and you know, وَلَا تَنَازَعُوا, don't argue, because the Quran then continues in one ayah, even though it's about a specific event, but you know, وَتَصْحَبَ your motivation, your encouragement, your strength as a Jama'ah will go away if you argue. Imagine being in a Jama'ah, in a group where you're arguing with one another. So in my opinion, Khilafah is the solution, but without the process that can solidify people as a unit. Inna Allah yuhibbu alladhina yuqatiluna fi sabili. Allah loves those who fight in his path as a solid wall. To really become a solid wall in the real sense of the word. That can't happen without going through a process of purification. That means not reading Quran only as a political, but reading Quran as is, objectively. That will be all inclusive. Reading Quran from also the perspective of tazkiyah. Reading Quran also from the perspective of politics and different other perspectives that would be needed. From the perspective of how the Jama'ah of the Prophet operated, what were the rules of that Jama'ah, etc., etc. So, هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب, and then he teaches them the law. يعلمهم الكتاب doesn't mean just teach the book. Kitab means law. كتب عليكم الصيام كتب عليكم القتال إن الصلاة كان على المؤمنين كتابا موقوتا. So kitab means, you know, something is written, meaning the king wrote it, that's it, it's the law. So you have to purify the people, you have to teach them the law, and then every law is subservient to the wisdom, meaning the law doesn't exist in principle itself, but the law is given due to a certain wisdom. Hikmah is in the Sunnah of the Prophet, but hikmah is also in Quran, Yasin wal Quran al-Hakim. So there has to be a process of gathering people together in the form of a Jama'ah and to unify them, to bring brotherhood amongst them, and to purify them, where they love each other. They will do anything for each other, and they will sacrifice for one another, not just for the cause. This is one of the differences between the Islamic groups influenced by communism versus the Prophet. That communism made them very strong as far as ideology is concerned, that if the leader says, you know, they say jump, they say how high, or they're willing to do anything for the ideology. But here the difference was that it's not just your commitment to the ideology, it's also your commitment to one another, the loyalty to one another. And so a Jama'ah that is very purified, a Jama'ah that is connected to the Book of Allah, this is the beginning of that process. Then the end of that promise is that process is the establishment of Khilafah. But part of that purification is also the intellectual, which is what we started with, which is that a misunderstanding of what Islam is, because that's what it's become. This Islam that we have today, it doesn't recognize, it's not the same Islam that the Prophet gave us. This Islam is a very Christianized form of Islam, the one that we have today. Anyway, so I don't want to say too
Jazakallah khair for sharing that. Ali, you wanted to make any comment?
I think probably Brother Mazin would probably have something to say back in terms of the feedback. But I think the gist I got from Sh.Omar Baloch is that it's the process itself that needs to be worked on, right? And in terms of coming up with a methodology, we need to obviously source it and link it back to the Quran and Sunnah. So Sh.Omar Baloch, correct me if I'm wrong. So you're saying that we need to focus on tazkiyatul nafs, emphasize on it in today's context, considering the modernities to be found across the planet. To actually come out of it, we need to have a group and kind of train that group accordingly for that group to actually go through the process, and then that group is able to establish a Khilafah. Is that where you're coming from?
Yeah, it shouldn't be one group in our case, because we're not under the Prophet. It should be many groups, hundreds of groups, thousands of groups, and each of them, because we may not be successful if we have only one group. We need a movement of movements, you can say.
But when we talk about the movement, so I mean, obviously the concept of the movement, we have to derive how that movement is to come about from Quran and Sunnah, from the prophetic methodology, right? So I think I will probably give Brother Mazin a little bit of a chance to kind of shed some light on that, and also provide us with some feedback, whatever Sheikh Umar just said, and how actually can be linked directly back to Quran and Sunnah, or how it cannot.
So so to go into more depth, I mean, obviously, I just wanted to kind of just give a very brief answer in the beginning, but this is a very big topic, so there's a lot of layers, lots of subtopics. So we have to recognize that there is the objective, so we have to understand what we have to do with regards to the objective, and also we have to understand how to get there, specifically step by step. One of the biggest problems when I talk about the secularization of the Ummah is that even the most sincere Muslims have been somewhat secularized when they approach politics. And this is not an attack on them personally, it's just that we're a product of our environment. So one of the indications of being affected by secularism is that when we approach how do we bring about political change in the Muslim Ummah, we right away start to think about what makes sense. Right, we start thinking that, well, to me, it makes sense that we have to, educate our children. To me, it makes sense that we have to count the rulers. To me, it makes sense that we have to go and raise arms and fight tyrant governments, or remove occupations, and so on and so forth. Just, it's just, but the problem is that just like we would ask, how do I pray Salah? We have to take a step back and say, well, first of all, let's find out what is, what are the ahkam related to salah, and what does the Quran and Sunnah say? How to step by step perform salah, how to step by step form a marriage contract, how to step by step do all these things. If there is a step by step procedure, some things don't have a step by step procedure, and some things do. The things that do have a step by step procedure are the things that we could never figure out on our own. That's an easy way of putting it. Right? It's things that are going to cause conflict. We're all going to have different opinions, and there's absolutely no way for a human being to know what the correct answer is. Like marriage, for example. What's the correct way of making a marriage contract? There's no way for us to possibly know what is the correct way of making a marriage contract. What is the correct way of worshiping Allah Azza wa Jal? It's impossible. You'll never figure it out. It's not a logical thing. How do we establish a political entity? Right? You can have 500 answers, and all of them could sound right. So that's why we need guidance on all these things. There has to be a method. The hukm is the obligation, and then the method is from Allah Azza wa Jal himself as well. And so that's why when we talk about how do we bring about political change, we have to ask ourselves, how did Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam bring about political change? And what aspect of his actions were wahi required of him, and what aspect of it was recommended of him, and then what aspect was simply mubah, right, permissible, and it's neutral. And so therefore, when we talk about the issue of how do we bring about political change, now before we talk about the method, just to touch a little more on the topic of the goal itself, Going back on the issue of secularization and the Ummah not looking at politics in the same way, the Ummah doesn't have a vision for what we're supposed to do. Now, the Ummah has a much better vision today than they did back in the 90s and early 2000s, alhamdulillah, due to the efforts of the da'wah carriers around the world, calling for the Khilafah. But the Ummah has to understand what it is that we're aiming for. If the Ummah doesn't know the vision of the Khilafah, what it looks like, what our political goal is to look like, the Ummah will end up doing what they did, for example, with the Arab uprising. They'll do whatever they're doing in America right now in terms of, hand-holding ceremonies and vigils and candle lighting ceremonies. So the vision has to be, we have to understand what the ruling system looks like, the structure, exactly the ahkam for the Khalifa, the Mu'awaneen, the Qada, the Wala, and so on. We have to know what the government structure looks like. We have to know what the economic system looks like, whether it's related to the ahkam related to buying and selling and currencies, land laws, taxation, property, public, private, and state property, and so on and so forth. We have to understand the social system, the ahkam related to male-female interactions in society. And we have to understand foreign policy, border laws, and so on. Like, do borders even exist? Are we allowed to have, where are we allowed to name the Khilafah? Like, Iraq or Afghanistan or Kashmir or Saudi? Are we allowed to name it after a family? And the education policy and so on. So we have to have a complete vision of what we are aiming to do. Otherwise, somebody will come to us and claim to have to be an Islamic government, whether it's Saudi or Afghanistan, and trick us for a good few decades. Or somebody will claim to be working towards it, such as Erdogan or whoever else you can think of. Or actually with Daesh, that was a very good example, where the Ummah had no idea. So these are Muslims who want a Khilafah very desperately, but they don't understand what it's supposed to look like. Those who understand what it looks like very, very thoroughly and very deeply, as soon as Daesh popped up, immediately knew they weren't a Khilafah. It's not because they were violent. America's violent and they're still a country. Right, that doesn't change. Some of the Khulafa throughout history were violent, and that doesn't make them suddenly they're not Khulafa, they're not Wala, they're not Muslims. So the issue is that Daesh wasn't a Khilafah because they did not have the structure, the state structure of a Khilafah, and did not implement the ahkam on a societal level. Most of the economic ahkam were not implemented. The ahkam when it comes to land laws, taxation, and so on was not implemented. Border laws were not implemented, and a lot of ahkam related to the military were not implemented. Right, and so they weren't even a state. Even according to Islam, they weren't even a state. They were just simply a militia that was pretending to be a state. So these are the sorts of things the Ummah has to have, this vision, this understanding, where we're able to recognize what a Khilafah looks like and what isn't a Khilafah. As far as the method itself to get there, this is also another really big topic, but just in brief, the Prophet ﷺ showed us how to bring about political independence. He didn't build masajid in Mecca, right? But he didn't build like separate masajid away from the Kaaba. He didn't build schools. He didn't raise the Sahaba to become rich. Some of the Sahaba, Umar ibn Khattab, like to become influential in society, to become influential in the parliament of Quraysh, which was called Dar al-Nadwa. Umar ibn Khattab was one of the most respected, one of the most senior and heard members of Dar al-Nadwa. So like today you have somebody who's a very senior member of parliament, very, very well respected. Whenever he debates or discusses something, everybody listens to him. Whenever he argues about something, he almost always wins, right? Because he's so strong in his wisdom and his arguments. And he became Muslim. Now he would have been a very, very valuable person to have in Dar al-Nadwa in order to apply pressure on them, to defend the Muslims, to speak on their behalf in Dar al-Nadwa. But Dar al-Nadwa was a gathering or a parliament that was founded on legislating kufr laws based on shirk and human desires. And so he was forbidden from participating in that gathering. Abu Bakr, same thing. Same thing with Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib in terms of his influence in society. Their influence was very, very severely restricted because of the ahkam of Islam that doesn't allow them to do certain things. So Umar ibn Khattab never attended Dar al-Nadwa again after becoming Muslim. Neither did any of the Sahaba. Right, so they had a different way of working towards political change. And there's basically three things. The first thing is, as I agree with Brother Ummah, he mentioned that the forming of a group is absolutely necessary. When Allah Azza wa Jalla tells us in the Quran, وَلْتَكُنْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. So let there come from among you a group or groups, according to the Mufassirin, who call to Islam, al-Khayr, and order the ma'ruf and forbid the munkar. So they call to obeying Allah Azza wa Jalla. So the first one is calling to khayr, which is calling non-Muslims to Islam. And then the other one is calling Muslims to obeying Allah Azza wa Jalla. So this is referring to groups. And this is again mentioned in the books of tafsir. And so, and plus this is the kind of work that can't be done individually. You can't work to bring about political change as individuals. It has to be as groups. As far as what the group has to do, basically there's three things that the group has to do. The group has to achieve three things. One, the group has to achieve the Ummah's understanding that Islam, the laws of Islam are the solutions for our lives. So the Ummah has to want the solutions of Islam as their laws in society. They can't want what Erdogan has to offer. They can't want what Taliban has to offer, or what Saudi wants to offer, or what the Shabab in Somalia have to offer, or anyone else has to offer. They have to understand that what we want is a complete Islamic system. All the ahkam, and they have to see the benefit of the guidance of Allah Azza wa Jal. Not necessarily logically, but that it's from Allah Azza wa Jal. So they have to want the Islamic way of life. The second thing is the Ummah has to have no loyalty to any political system that exists today, including the rulers themselves. So the Ummah cannot have any loyalty to Erdogan. They cannot have any loyalty to Saudi or Qatar or Saddam Hussein back in the day, or anybody, regardless of who they might be. So not only does the Ummah have to understand the solutions of Islam and know that what isn't the solution of Islam, they have to know where their political loyalties must lie. So they have to reject anything other than what a Khalifa is. So where our political loyalties lie is a Khalifa. That's it, one single Khalifa. We're not allowed to have more. And the Khalifa is the only ruler that Islam allows. And we must reject presidents, every other form of ruler that exists in the world today. Sorry, excuse me really quickly. My headset turned off. Let me turn it back on again. And so you can hear me still, correct?
Yes,
okay.
I can hear you.
And so, the second thing is rejecting all other rulers and all other political systems, and the third one is gaining the complete loyalty. So not only do they have to convert to Islam, but the complete loyalty of the military of that land. And where I'm getting this from is from the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When he called society, the ayat that came down, just like Brother Umar mentioned, which is وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. If the girl who was killed for being a girl, like the infant newborn, what sin was she killed for? This is questioning your way of life. How can you live like this? The ayat of riba, how can you deal like this? وَيْلٌ لِلْمُطَفِّفِينَ, how can you be unjust in the marketplace, and so on. So the Prophet ﷺ was getting them to question their laws, their source of laws, their way of life, and the way that they perceive society in general. As far as the rulers, the ayat came out talking about Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, Abu Jahl, Abu Lahab, the leaders of Quraysh. You don't see the Quran attacking some random citizen in Mecca. The Quran was addressing the rulers because they're the ones who make things happen in society. So the Prophet ﷺ was humiliating them in the Quran. Allah Azza wa Jalla was humiliating them through the wahi in front of everybody constantly. And the Prophet ﷺ was identifying that you should have a better leadership than this, which is obviously him and anybody who follows him. And then the third one, which is the military. Now, of course, while he was in Quraysh, it goes hand in hand. The society accepting Islam means the military accepting Islam. But when Mecca refused, when Quraysh refused after about 7 years, 6-7 years, the Prophet ﷺ was ordered to go to other tribes and seek military support from them. There's a narration in Al-Bayhaqi, graded as Sahih and Hasan, depending on the Muhaddith, and it was narrated by Ali radhiallahu anhu, and he said, when Allah Azza wa Jal commanded his Prophet to go out to the Arabian tribes, he took me and Abu Bakr, and we went to Rabi'a. So first they went to Rabi'a, and then after that they went to Bani Shayban, Bani Amr, Sa'sa, and so on. And he went to Kinda and Hanifa and Kalb and so on. He went to all these different tribes, and he asked them, and he said to them, أدعوكم أن تشهدوا أن لا إله إلا الله وأني رسول الله وأن تأووني وتنصروني. I call you to accepting that there's no God but Allah, and that I am the messenger of Allah, and that you take me in and make me and give me military assistance, and he becomes the ruler. We know the famous examples of Bani Shayban. They said that we will not fight the Persians, right? We'll fight the Arabs with you, but we won't. But we've made, and they said, ولكن لا حيلة لنا في إخواننا الفرس. So we can't fight the Persians because we're brothers with them, meaning that they have a treaty. And then you had the example of Bani Amr of Sa'sa, where they said they want the Khilafah after him. And so he refused. They specifically said that they want the Khilafah after him. And he said no, and they said, are we going to put our necks out in front of the Arabs, and then Allah will make you powerful and successful as a ruler, and then somebody else gets the Khilafah after us? We don't want what you have. And they left. And they actually ended up becoming enemies to Islam after that. So the Prophet ﷺ was looking for military assistance from people who would first convert to Islam, and then so when he found Al-Khazraj, or rather Al-Khazraj found him because they approached him. Al-Khazraj came to him, and he knew that Al-Aws al-Khazraj were at war, so he said, go back to your people and call them to Islam, and you'll see how what's happening. The next year they came back, and they came back with 12 of Al-Khazraj and 3 of Al-Aws, and that indicated having 3 of Al-Aws with them was huge. I don't know if today we can really see how significant that was for Al-Aws al-Khazraj, who were at war for so long and hated each other so much. For 15 of them, and including 3 of Al-Aws, to come and they're Muslims, indicated that's a very, very big success. And so he sent Mus'ab bin Umair radiallahu anhu, and in a single year he transformed the city to accept Islam as the way of life, to reject any form of government, any rulers, any leaders other than Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and whoever follows him, and for them as the military, Aws al-Khazraj united with unquestionable loyalty. And that's how you bring about societal change. The last thing I'm going to mention just briefly is the fact that we tend to have this very strange idea that we must fix the Ummah. If you think about this carefully, it's absurd to think that we can fix the 2 billion Muslims in the world while the society is working against us. All media, all education, everything in this world is working against us. And so what we're going to actually do is fix some of the Muslims. Maybe millions, maybe even hundreds of millions, but we're not going to fix 2 billion people. There's always going to be terrible Muslims around us. There's always going to be our own ulama, our own leaders of masajid, our own teachers. They are going to be supportive of the current government. They're going to tell us to be quiet and not talk about these things. Just earlier today, I was dealing with a post by some very big school in Bangladesh, and he's constantly making posts saying that kingdoms are allowed in Islam and we should not speak out against the government, and Saudi and Qatar are good governments. And then you have, for example, Ibn Bayya saying that we should be loyal to UAE, and we should accept this treaty with the Zionists. And then you have Sudais now giving khutbahs, preparing the people to accept these treaties with the Zionists. And so we have to recognize that we're like, when we look at these sorts of topics, we have to approach them with an understanding of how the Prophet ﷺ approached these things in society, and recognize that there's always obviously going to be people these days who are going to be working against this call.
So I want to Jazakallah khair for sharing that, Brother Mazin. Now, it's like both your brothers had highlighted how basically many Muslims, or a majority of Muslims, are secularized to the nth degree, right? This is the problem we have. And it's really sad, right? Like if you think about it, for someone to realize the comprehensive system of Islam, for it to arise and fight injustice would be more easier today than back then with the current technology we have, right? So for example, we have I think close to 57 Muslim majority countries with well-oiled brigades, right? And just if they just realized what to follow in Islam, we won't be in this mess, right? We'd be going in and liberating our fellow brothers and sisters who have been victims of genocide, etc. So wouldn't it be fair to say that this time is a really, really sad time, or probably the saddest time for Muslims right now, currently? Would you agree with that, or have there been any worse times than this?
So I would say definitely in my opinion, the worst time was the 50s and 60s and 70s. Now, this current last decade or so, maybe about decade and a half, are excellent times. Not because we fixed the problem, but because the Ummah has grown so dramatically. Now, it's interesting how so few people had noticed this. I have weirdest discussions because people are like, oh my God, the Ummah is terrible and everything's a mess. And I don't understand how we don't see. Look at the Ummah back in the 90s compared to the 80s compared to the early 2000s. Like back in the 50s, the Muslims were going to Kulthum concerts high as a kite after smoking pot and spending 7 hours listening to her, just the introduction to her song, right? Because I don't know if you guys know, Kulthum, she has these ridiculously long songs. Just her intro would go on for about an hour, and then the song would start. And that's what people loved, like the Islam, like saying assalamu alaikum was like saying hi, and people didn't even recognize that it's a dua, right? And so you talk to people from the previous generation, like if I talk to my family sometimes early when I first started studying the deen and realizing these things and explain, they were like looking at me like, what the hell are you talking about? This is assalamu alaikum is like saying hello. So so when you look at not only that, like back in the not only the issue of the Ummah's growth in terms of understanding the deen, but their desire to learn has changed very, very dramatically just in the last 10 years. You have the Ummah in back in the early 2000s, where the loyalty for Al Saud and that this is Islam and we should just follow them, that was the norm. The Khilafah was a bid'ah, and that's it. That was the end of the discussion. And then now you find that the institutions are full of Muslims. Muslims are rushing right now with Al-Azhar. Al-Azhar in Egypt back not long ago, I mean, even recently, but I think maybe about 15, 16 years ago, give or take, Al-Azhar was the actual physical Al-Azhar was free or almost free to go to, and you going and taking an Azhar degree was considered the equivalent of going and getting a degree in street cleaning. Like you're going to be a street cleaner, you want to be a sheikh, like what's the point of going to Al-Azhar? What can you do with that degree? It was worth nothing. And Al-Azhar was basically empty. I mean, it wasn't totally empty, but it wasn't full. Today, it's packed. It's at capacity. Right now, we have people who are now taking the online degree, and I've come across a lot of people who are now taking the online degree, and they're in Egypt. And the only reason why they're able to take the online degree is because they have a second citizenship somewhere else. There are huge numbers of Muslims in Egypt who want to take the in Azhar degree, but they can't because it's full. And they're trying to find any way to get some sort of foreign visa or citizenship of some sort in order to be able to qualify for the online degree. And that's how full it is. It's at full capacity right now. The Ummah is rushing back to the deen, and their love and interest for the deen is getting stronger and stronger every single day. So I definitely believe that we're in a very, very good time. And I guess the best part of it all, to be honest, absolutely, is this is a dream time. Muslims should be kissing, I don't know, every blessing of Allah Azza wa Jalla that they have in their life. They should be praying day and night and crying tears of thanks to Allah Azza wa Jalla to be alive at this time, this particular time. Because we're right at the edge of the last period before the reestablishment of the Khilafah. And anybody, Allahu Alam of course, anybody who has a role in bringing about the Khilafah, what honor would you have on the Day of Judgment? To be raised and for Allah Azza wa Jalla to recognize you as one of the people who reestablished the Khilafah, brought back his deen after it was abandoned. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned, there's a hadith, he said, he asked the Sahaba, هل تعلمون من خير الإيمان إيمانا يوم القيامة? Do you know who the people of the very best of Iman are on the Day of Judgment? And the Sahaba said, is it the angels? Is it the prophets? And then in the end, he said, no, they are people who have not been born yet. It's a long hadith. But he mentioned that there are people who have not been born yet. They find al-waraq al-mu'allaq, right? So now some interpreted this to be the hanging papers, meaning like Sahaba used to hang Quran and hadith in their house. But maybe a stronger interpretation is al-waraq al-mu'allaq is the papers of the Quran and Sunnah. It's just suspended. Right? Suspended, meaning it's hanging, but it's not implemented. They found the suspended papers and they read it, they studied it, and they implemented it. They taught it to people and they ensured its implementation. They are the best people of Iman on the Day of Judgment. after he explained that the malaika are the best, but he's referring to other than them. He said the prophets are the best, but he's referring to other than them. And then he said that these people are the best of Iman. So we don't know if we could be among them, but what greater time could we possibly dream to live in than the time where it's getting easier to recognize that the Khilafah is a fard. It's getting easier to recognize that you can play a role in this, right? So what better time could we dream of being in right now?
Jazakallah khair for that. I don't know if I agree with you totally on that. I mean, I really admire and I really like your optimism, you know, and we need to try to be optimistic. I totally agree with you that, totally admire that. But uh, I would say that we're in a really sad state, and I'd have to go back and do kind of an analysis, because you said that back in the 80s we were far worse off. Is like, you know, for example, let's take the example of what happened to our brothers and sisters in Burma, the horrendous genocide that took place there, right? I still, yeah, like we could say, oh, our governments didn't do anything, but again, I didn't see a lot of sympathy even from the Ummah regarding that, or also what's happening to our brothers and sisters in East Turkestan, and the list can go on and on and on. And you know, you talk about, you know, there's 2 billion Muslims. We can't really do anything about that. It's only a few people who are going to make a difference. You know, sometimes I think is that when we talk about, oh, we do see a resurgence of understanding that the Islamic system is the solution for both Muslims and non-Muslims. Maybe we're using this, or gauging this from our inner circles, because we see in our inner circles of probably intellectuals that, yeah, they understand that. But when we take a look, you know, a little closer to, when we look at our families and extended families and relatives, it seems that they're going further away from having a comprehensive and holistic understanding of notion of Islam. So I don't know. I'm kind of skeptical about that part, but
I mean, sorry if I just may interject quickly. I think, Zishan, I think I hear what you're trying to say there. At the same time, if you really go back into the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, right, we were obviously inflicted by the communism at that point in time, right, and all sorts of different isms. But you brought the issue of Uyghur Muslims as an example. Yes, Burma Muslims, right? Kashmir. Yes, the governments right now are not taking any action. But any information you have on the media right now essentially is generated by the Ummah itself, right? The issue of the Uyghur Muslims right now is basically being blasted all over the media channels and everywhere else through the efforts of Muslim Ummah, not by the governments, right? Take an example of Imran Khan as an example of Pakistan. He doesn't even admit there is a genocide happening right next door, right? But at the same time, these issues are brought to surface, brought to light through the efforts of Ummah, people like you and myself, right? Creating Facebook posts, going, documenting all these things. But these things were actually not happening, back in the 90s, 80s, 60s. Not because there was lack of technology. Yeah, given there was a lack of technology, but at the same time, people were not talking about these things because they were too busy listening to 8-hour songs of Khatun, whatever her name is, right? So there were other issues at play at that point in time. So yes, we do have corruption. You always, we look at the media, as example, in Muslim countries, they are broadcasting filth, essentially, right? Yeah, that's given, but that's a very small, section or segment of the society, right? So-called liberal segment of the society. But overall, generally speaking, more than 70 to 80% of the population in Muslim majority countries is still very conservative, right? They still hold, the Islamic core values. It's just that, in my opinion, and I believe that, they just need a little bit more shining. It's a little bit rusted. They just need to be, introduced a core orthodox Islamic concept to actually revive what they hold in their hearts. But I mean, again, going back to the 70s and 60s, things were completely different. People were not even talking about these ideas. For example, if Muslims were getting killed in Kashmir, they would be like, it's none of our business, right? We would just rather go and, do something else. So yes, I mean, all the issues right now, I mean, tell me one government actually who has brought any of these issues to surface, right? In the Burmese issue, the Uyghur Muslims in Yemen, right? In Bangladesh, in Pakistan, right? In India. right? Even the genocide that's happening in India against the Muslims is basically, we come to know about it through the Ummah, right? It's basically the Ummah who's basically broadcasting all these issues on different social media platforms, right? Government is silent.
And one thing I'll also add actually to that is the fact that we have to understand what metrics we're using as well. Because when you look at, for example, the Ummah's rejection of nationalism today compared to how they were back in up until the early 2000s, like maybe 2005, Iraqis wouldn't marry Jordanians, Jordanians wouldn't marry Syrians, Turkish people saw Arabs as oppressors and and occupiers, or sorry, rather, sorry, not as fools and backwards losers. Whereas the Arabs saw the Turkish people as occupiers. Now you have the whole Arab world watching Arturos, and they love it. You have Egyptians never marrying the Libyans, and so on. So nationalism has gone backwards. Look at the masajid. People always complain, oh, the masajid are empty. What are you talking about? The masajid were empty, and the only people who used to go to the masajid back in the up until the early 2000s were only old people and their kids who were dragged along with them. Today, I go to the masjid, well, not today, but back before the pandemic started, and we used to have about 300 to 400 people every single Isha Salah in our central masjid here in London, Ontario, right? So, and I used to meet brothers, and it's mostly young people, mostly, I mean, obviously men in their 50s and 60s, not all 70 and 80-year-olds, and then you have a very large number of teenagers and early 20s. And I've met teenagers, 16, 17-year-olds who used to take the bus from the other side of the city on their own, not being dragged by their parents. They chose. They're taking the bus across the city just to go to the masjid and pray salah in the jama'ah. So and not only that, when we're talking about anecdotal evidence, I'm not basing this on anecdotal evidence, because I'm not even looking within my circles. As obviously as a da'wah carrier in Hizb ut-Tahrir, I go everywhere in the world, and I wherever I go, I discuss. I've gone to Oman and discussed with the Ummah there. I've discussed obviously in Jordan, in Turkey, in obviously you name it, basically any countries that I've gone to around the world, and I've spoken to Muslims. Not only that, we discuss with people online all the time, people who agree and people who disagree. And what I found, especially in the Middle East, in whether it's in Qatar or UAE or Saudi or Oman and so on, and in Turkey, every single one of those places, I've been to them, I went to discuss with the Ummah intentionally, I would just discuss with just random people as much as I possibly could to see their reactions to what I had to say. One interesting example, just a few years ago, I was walking with some brothers, security guards in Turkey. I couldn't find a masjid. There was a little shop beside a masjid. I couldn't find the shop because I couldn't find the masjid, because they all look alike. And so I went up to some security guards and I tried to describe the area. And so they're walking me to a part where they can show me the direction to go. And as we're walking, I asked them, what do you think of Mustafa Kemal? And they said, well, Mustafa Kemal, founder of Turkey, he did some good things. And this is both of them. And then they look at me and they said, what do you think? And I said, he's a kafir, a shaitan, an enemy of Islam. He destroyed the Khilafah. And they said, yes, wallahi, yes, you're right. But they said, be careful. Don't say these things because you could get in trouble. And they're so excited. And so you go to most Muslims right now, wherever you go. In Jordan, I walk up to a Yemeni food hut, kind of like a kiosk, and I asked him, I said that, what do you think is like to lead us? And you listen to them, and Muslims are beginning to recognize that we need our own Muslim leadership, and people care about Islam. I remember one time I was sitting in a cafe in England, and the brother I was talking to was saying the Ummah doesn't want Islam. They don't care about the Khilafah. They just want to live in the West. So we were in this one Iraqi cafe, and the owners were known to not be the most practicing people in the whole world. So again, they always play Kalthum on the television. And so I called the waiter over, and again, you can tell he's not really a practicing Muslim. You can tell from his behavior. I asked him to call. I said, okay, let me prove something to you. I called the waiter over. I've never asked him. I've never heard his opinions. It was just a swing in the dark because I'm confident of the answer. I asked the brother. He was Iraqi. So I asked him, and he was swearing like while he's working, saying Arabic swear words and so on, like really bad manners. So I called him over and I said, let me ask you a question. He said, what? I said, if an Islamic Khilafah were to be reestablished, that would be ruled with the same justice of Abu Bakr and Umar, but with the same comforts that you find in the West, would you want to stay here or would you want to go there? And comforts, I mean like as in economic justice. I can't remember how I worded it, but the idea was it's comfortable there. You're not in poverty. Would you want to stay here? Would you want to go there? He looked at me and says, are you stupid? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, why would I want to stay here? I don't want to be here now. I would do anything to go to a the thing is, when we have to recognize that the to have brothers in wearing a dasha, kufi, holding a Quran in their hand, and of course, wearing like the whole like Saudi kind of look that they were following. And they were used to yell at me, telling me the Khilafah is not from Islam. One brother took a Quran and put it down on the table in front of us. We had the table on Edgeware Road in London, England. And he would tell me, show me where in the Quran it says that a Khilafah is a part of Islam. This is a practicing brother, very clearly, big long beard, wearing a dajdasha, and saying Qala Allah, Qala Rasul the whole entire day. And so he was yelling at me, saying, where does Islam say we have to have a Khilafah? Go to anybody today and say the word Khilafah, and they'll be like, what are you talking about? It's like you're saying Salah. Yes, we know Salah is a part of Islam. Yes, we know the Salah is important. But then they come up with but let's first work on this, and let's first work on that, and so on and so forth. So the thing is that in terms of how far the Ummah has come, one last thing, that just to touch on this very important point, which is you're not going to find everybody getting better. What's going to happen naturally is, as people move away from these loyalties to these governments, to these systems, to these corrupt ways of life, you're going to find a split between those who are going to remain loyal and they're going to become even more stubborn in their loyalty, and those who've disconnected from it and moved on and progressed towards Islam. So we're going to find lots of our family members and lots of our friends who are going to become stubborn. You're going to find lots of imams and lots of Quran memorizers who are going to be stubborn, and they're going to still be loyal to, like you have lots of, like Ghamidi, for example, in Pakistan. You have all these individuals who just popped out of the woodwork, and they're now suddenly just defending nationalism. They say nationalism is accepted in Islam. We should be loyal to the governments. Khilaf is not a part of Islam. And have all these people coming out and trying to get us to become loyal to these governments. And so, of course, that's going to happen naturally. So to say that some people are going to, even most people, because we're not talking about, like, even if 1.5 or let's say 1.5 billion of the Muslims all are absolutely staunch supporters of Kemalism, nationalism, socialism, communism, whatever, million Muslims are dedicated Muslims who want nothing but the Khilafah. 500 million people is what, 20% larger than the size of the whole entire United States, right? That's 10 times the size of Iraq. So the numbers that we often tend to look at is that even if 3 out of 4, even if 5 out of 6, even 9 out of 10 Muslims are corrupt, the 1 out of 10 Muslims is enough to have a super state that could end up ruling the whole entire world. So we have to recognize that we're not looking for every single Muslim in the world. We're looking for a very sincere, dedicated, strong leadership that is dedicated to Islam and understands Islam inside and out and knows exactly how to apply it. And a part of the world where, at least in that part, right now we're seeing the whole entire world change, but at least in that part, a desire for the full Islamic way of life, a total rejection of any political leader that is not a Khalifa, not the Khilafah, and a military that is completely obedient in the end of Islam. Once you have that, you have political change, and it only starts in one place, and then it spreads. And as it spreads, people will change very, very quickly, very, very dramatically. Inshallah ta'ala.
Sh.Omar?
I have a different opinion. Bismillah. The 1950s and 1960s where the Muslim masses, they were against, you can say, the symbols of Islam. They spoke against the beard. They spoke against the sunnahs of the Prophet. They spoke against hijab. Secularism has an effect, which is this materialism. Spirituality is part of human nature. And so as a result, that this being in the secular world for a while then makes man want to go back towards spirituality. And so what you're seeing in the world today as a global phenomenon is that people are going back to religion. So Christians are becoming more Christian, Jews are becoming more Jews, Hindus are becoming more Hindus, and therefore Muslims, quote unquote, are becoming more Muslims. But there's a huge problem, in my opinion, in this phenomenon that's taking place. So, this in process of becoming more religious, which is a global phenomenon that's happening right now, and it's partly at least due to man's need for spirituality, and man is tired of what secularism has to offer. And so you have this global, right? So it's not only Muslim fundamentalism, you'll see Hindu fundamentalism in India. You'll see Jewish fundamentalism in Israel and around the Jewish diaspora, wherever they are. And you'll see the Christian fundamentalism also increasing. The problem is, now coming specifically to the Muslims, is that we had a period in the 1950s and the 1960s where people were antagonistic to Islam, ideologically antagonistic to Islam. And at that time, secularism was at its peak. And now that people are becoming tired of secularism and moving more towards religion, like I said, it could be Christianity, could be Judaism, could be Hinduism, but people as a whole are going towards religion. But in this process, that religion that we're learning, that Islam that we're learning, the Islam that we are living and the Islam that we're learning is a morbid or a very not the original view of Islam. They're learning this alternative Islam, majority of the people. And so my feeling is even when the legalities are there, the spirit is not there, the ruh is not there. And the true, you can say, conviction, the love of Islam, the love of Allah, love of His Messenger, that aspect is missing. So more women are wearing hijab today, yes, but that hijab is the same as Kasiyatin Arya. Still, it's even sometimes worse when you frame the person with the type of hijab that's there. It's even worse than the actual intent of what hijab was supposed to do. This is what I mean. Then people are taking Islamic loans instead of doing riba, for example. At least in their minds, this is okay. So it's okay, and that's not the problem. But the whole Islamic intent is not to be in debt. Meaning, as from the spiritual perspective, the Prophet used to, ma'sama wa maghrama. The Prophet used to pray against having sins or having debts. So that whole spirit of Islam, the actual spirit of Islam. So people are becoming religious, yes. But so are the Hindus, and so are the Christians, and so are the Muslims. And in that sense, we're all becoming more religious. But is that religiousness that we're getting, is that religiousness the religiousness of the Prophet, or some deformed version of Islam that we've learned to somehow adopt? It's like we have this environment that we're living in, and so it's like putting an IBM part in a compact computer, kind of Islam that we have. And so I agree, and I hope, inshallah, I'm wrong, and my brother is right, because that would be good. But as far as Khilafah itself is concerned, I think more people are probably, I feel, also being a student of Dr. Sir Ahmed, being in Tanzim Islami, also learning from Hizb ut-Tahrir for some time, and I feel that all the work that of the Islamic movements that had been done up till 9/11, after that kind of like went down the hill. And there's very few of us that are really left, that are really sincere to that cause of like a holistic solution of Islam. This is how I feel. being positive, that's really good. And I don't know if he's being positive as a strategy or if he actually feels that way. I mean, you know, the prophets, and I think, you know,
It's not a strategy.
It's not a strategy.
It's
You
not a
know, so
strategy.
that's great. Alhamdulillah. I just feel that,
Understanding
you
of
know,
the reality, eh?
Yeah.
my feeling is that our Islam is superficial. We are more religious, yes. We are more religious, I agree. But that religiousness that we have is more superficial than real.
Can I just, sorry, I think, Sheikh Omar, I think I do agree with you, not wholeheartedly, but to some extent, to some degree, that, okay, yes, we are, I'm not saying that the religiosity where we're moving towards as an ummah, it somehow represents the true Islam, true Islamic ideology. I totally agree with that. But at the same time, you know, you were giving an example of an IBM piece going into some hardware. Let me give you an example. You know, we have this software, right, as an example, you know, where this religiosity we're moving towards is not obviously orthodox of nature, but at the same time, if we don't have a proper hardware to actually put that software into, to actually really shine and actually, you know, really show and represent its true meaning, that software by itself is useless without a shell. So that's it's all good, you know, that we are moving, you know, on that trajectory towards more religiosity, but at the same time, as long as we don't have that system in place, right, which is the Khilafah, obviously, which provides a hardware, a shell for that software to flourish and really, you know, show its true colors and how actually it functions with all the complexities and intricacies involved, right? We're not gonna see that end result. So I think, you know, compared to obviously, you know, if relatively, you know, compared to 50s, 60s, you know, the last few decades, you know, we are, I believe, you know, moving.
So what do you say about Prophet Muhammad being in Mecca, for example?
What about him?
Meaning he was in the minority there too, right?
Yeah.
And so he was in an environment that was antagonistic to him too.
Right.
Just like we would be. So it's not the issue only of that, okay, if you have the Khilafah, then you'll get the perfect product, which has not always been historically the case. You know, Muhammad bin Qasim was killed by the same Khilafah that we sometimes look up to. You know, the brother, when he was talking, he was like, when he gave the example to the waiter, he said the Khilafah of Abu Bakr and Umar. Well, how many of the Khulafa lived the lifestyle of Abu Bakr and Umar? Very few. Maybe 99% of them didn't. So
Let's
anyway,
not forget the society, because remember, we're talking about the society under Abu Bakr and Umar. We're not talking about them individually. As the Khulafa changed, as Muawiyah became the ruler, as Umar ibn Abdul-Aziz, or any of the, whether it's Al-Hajjaj or whether it's Al-Mu'tasim and so on, people in society, like if you look at America right now, it doesn't matter whether it was Bush or Obama or Trump, people are still living, going to work, living the same luxuries. And so that's what we're talking. We're talking about life under the Khilafah was generally unaffected. People all around every city, except for the capital, or maybe a few cities, maybe about Baghdad, were completely unaffected by the political conflicts. So let's always remember that these details.
Now, the other point, I would comment on that, but the point I was trying to make to the brother was this, is that if you have a strong Jama'ah with a strong ideology, it's almost like that software would create a bubble of itself, of its own operating rules. And so if you are able to do that, like the Prophet was able to do that even though you're living in a society that's antagonistic to your lifestyle, but if you have a strong Jama'ah, then that can work as an anecdote to that problem.
So I think.
But the thing is, the problem is that we cannot do that today, or as things are. Meaning, there may be some Jama'ah in some places. One of the big problems is that nowadays we have virtual Jama'ahs. We don't have geographical integrity, because to actually be the type of Jama'ah the Prophet was in, you have to be physically with the brothers, be there, and to have that geographical integrity. Like this virtual, like I'm part of this organization or this Jama'ah, but the other person's in the North Pole, or the other person's in Europe and the other person's there. That has its benefits, no doubt, but it has to be concentrated people together, really, and then they can form the type of atmosphere to counter that negative atmosphere. So this is the point I'm trying to say.
So I think you're referring to if I look at the contemporary movements, Murabitun movement as an example, right? The Al-Murabitun. So basically, where they have this geographical integrity, and they basically form a Jamaat in let's say in certain geographical location within a nation state, and basically that's where they groom and go through the process of basically having like a state within a state, essentially, right? Let it be a village, like a Muslim village kind of style, or where they actually have somewhat maybe 70 to 80% of the ahkam, Sharia ahkam being implemented, and they
I
have
consider
Amir.
that more like the Medina phase, yes, in my feeling, because I don't consider Medina to be an Islamic state.
But at the same time, Prophet ﷺ, he never actually had that vision, though, right? He was basically never really had a state within a state, right? He was basically, if we look at and read the Sirah, the methodology basically which he adopted was primarily, going to people in power,